Welcome back to Dingo Reviews. This is our special episode, our top 5 Halloween films.
All right, yeah, guys, so we are talking about top 5 Halloween films. These are films based around Halloween, so not necessarily scary films that people would automatically assume that you're going to be watching on Halloween, but we wanted to do ones that were based around Halloween.
Yeah, and these also aren't like the most critically acclaimed or the most scary. These are just our favorites.
Absolutely. So let's get started with number 5, Jerry. So we pulled out Hocus Pocus, which is a 1993 film, family film, kind of like you mentioned. It stars Bette Midler, Sarah Jessica Parker, Kathy Najimy. Basically, it's about a trio of witches, whatever. Exactly. That are awakened after, I think, 200 years, and they come back to terrorize their small Salem town.
Yeah, it's a classic Halloween movie, perfect to watch with any age range. It's got some good music and songs that will be memorable. It's just a fun movie. You know, it's got a talking cat, everything kids will love. I say that this is probably a good movie for anyone. I would maybe 7 and older. Maybe under 7 might be too scary.
A little bit scary for younger children. You know, it does deal with witches. There are ghosts in it, talking cats, that sort of thing. But definitely, I mean, I was a young kid when this came out, so I remember watching this at that age. Totally enjoyable for the whole family.
Definitely. And the next film we have is also a family-friendly movie. It's Nightmare Before Christmas by Tim Burton. Strangely enough, not directed by Tim Burton, right?
Yeah, exactly. I found this out when we were doing some of our research for this project here. I always assumed it was directed by Tim Burton because it basically says a Tim Burton film.
Same here.
But I guess it's written by Tim Burton, but it was directed by Henry Selick.
Yeah, I don't know what else he's done. I didn't bother to look it up, but I found it interesting. I guess Tim Burton oversaw the project from a writing and stories.
Excellent. Okay. So 1993 film, same as Hocus Pocus, but, has the voices of Danny Elfman, who went on to do a lot of musical arrangements and soundtracks for films after that. Catherine O'Hara as well. It's basically a stop motion or animated film that stars, as most people know, Jack Skellington, and he attempts to bring Christmas to the Halloween town that they live in.
Yeah, and I don't think this film needs much explanation. Almost everybody's seen it, but if you haven't, it's great to watch. And if you have seen it, I think this has, rewatchability.
Absolutely. This is definitely either or a Halloween or a Christmas movie. You could watch it at either holiday.
Yeah, and it's awesome. Sometimes, you have family over and you just want something on in the background. This is one of those movies you can definitely have also.
Absolutely. So going on to our third film, Jer, here, we actually do have a horror film, the classic 1978 Halloween, directed by John Carpenter. Stars, obviously, Jamie Lee Curtis. That's where she got the nickname Scream Queen from. Also stars Donald Pleasance. But basically, if you haven't seen this film, the story is 15 years after murdering his little sister on Halloween, Michael Myers comes back to his hometown to start killing again.
Yeah, and I think that the main thing about this movie is it's the classic Halloween scary movie. It is a movie that kind of started the trend of horror movies that are, that's typical slasher type of movie. A scary movie, it's good to watch, in the dark. I don't know if it holds up to today with how intense horror films have gotten. I don't think it's really scary at all. There's a lot of laughable moments in it.
Yeah, I mean, watching it, obviously when it came out in 1978, different kind of set of circumstances. People were a lot more scared in cinemas and that sort of thing. But you're right, judging from some of the recent horror movies we've seen, slasher movies, it's got a completely different kind of mentality behind it.
Yeah, it's almost innocent in a way, but again, this is more for maybe nostalgia and the fact that it is the classic Halloween movie. We have to include it.
Right, absolutely. The start of, like you said, the slasher films, so definitely got to be included on our list. So if we don't move on to our second movie on the list, we're going to keep it in the horror theme. Going back all the way to 1973, we're going to talk about The Exorcist.
Yeah, this is actually one of my favorite horror movies of all time, mainly because I think the cinematography is fantastic. It still stands today, and it is actually still scary.
Yeah, absolutely. They've done, obviously a lot of sequels for The Exorcist, so going back, the original is obviously the best in my opinion.
I agree.
They also did release a director's cut a few years ago that actually added additional scenes onto it that I thought added to the scariness and creepiness factor. But for our viewers or listeners, if you haven't seen it, like we said, a 1973 film, stars Linda Blair, Ellen Bernstein, and then Max Max von Sydow as the exorcist, as the priest. Essentially, pretty straightforward story. A teenage girl gets possessed by, I believe, the devil or some demon of sorts. Her mom's got to seek help of some priests to perform an exorcism.
Yeah, and this movie does a really good job of actually holding tension, being scary. It has suspense in it as well as some gore and scariness. So
and I mean, like you said, the suspense. I mean, essentially the whole film almost takes place in their house, in her room.
Right.
She's essentially in bed for the last half of the movie, being possessed. You've got the exorcist in the room performing their exorcism. You've got some creepy stuff that happens. If you haven't seen it, we're not going to spoil it, but definitely a film that we would totally recommend on Halloween.
Yeah, and also, if you're just a cinephile, I would say you definitely have to watch this to see the influences that it's had on other movies like The Ring, The Grudge, all those types of movies that have a typical sort of nuances to it. They all started here, so take a look at it.
Absolutely. And also, too, just to throw this out there, Jer, it's not essentially said per se in the film, but the film does actually take place around Halloween, so which is why we're including it. So scary film taking place around Halloween meets both of our criteria.
Definitely.
And then let's go on to the number one film that we've chosen. This is more of a cult film and, kind of genre busting.
Yeah, it's an indie film. It doesn't really follow any genre at all. It's one of, I think, both of our favorite movies, regardless whether it's Halloween or not. But the reason I really like this movie for our top 5 Halloween is there's not any other movie that I think that oozes Halloween essence as much as this movie.
Absolutely. So if you guys aren't aware, we're talking about Donnie Darko. Like I said, Jared said, more of an independent film, kind of a cult film. If you haven't seen it, maybe a lot of people haven't, definitely recommend it. It's actually in my top 10 of all time.
Same here.
But it stars Jake Gyllenhaal. It stars his sister Maggie Gyllenhaal, James Duvall, Seth Rogen.
Seth Rogen is one of the bullies in it.
Wow. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. So, this was back in 2001.
Right.
Okay. Directed by Richard Kelly. Mm-hmm. But the synopsis of the film is basically a troubled teen played by Jake Gyllenhaal is plagued by visions of a man in a rabbit suit, right? And he manipulates him to commit certain crimes, and after he narrowly escapes a bizarre accident.
Yeah, and I mean, this movie's really out there because that is the synopsis that we got off of our online research, but really the movie is not really about that.
No, it's about a lot of different things, and a couple things for our viewers. It is really a trippy film.
That's right.
It has a lot of different elements. That's why we said genre busting.
Yep.
And there are some surprises, so I definitely don't want to do any spoilers for people who haven't seen it, but there are great elements throughout the film that you can see from other genres bringing those elements in.
Definitely. I mean, it transcends everything. It's got sci-fi, it's got thriller, it's got indie. I will say that one of my biggest recommendations is if you've never seen it, your first viewing should be the theatrical release.
Yes.
Right? Because the soundtrack is arranged perfectly, I think, in the theatrical release.
Right. And going back, so it was released in 2001. The film's actually set during the 80s. Yeah. And the great thing about the soundtrack is it pulls awesome songs from the 80s that just fit the thematic element that's going on.
Yeah, none of the songs feel out of place or forced. And in fact, I think this is one of the most masterful uses of soundtrack that is not original soundtrack.
I absolutely agree with that. Definitely. So obviously that's why we rated it number 1. If you haven't checked it out, guys, we highly recommend it. If you have checked it out, check it out again on Halloween. It's got the Halloween element running throughout. It is set during Halloween. There's more, I would say, than just the setting that play into the theme of the movie. But I would totally recommend it to everybody who's listening and watching.
Absolutely. And that wraps up our top 5 Halloween movies. I'm sure next year we'll have another top 5 of some different things.
Yeah.
Check us out on YouTube, on Facebook, on Stitcher, Spotify, and iTunes or Apple Podcasts. We're going to have some more things coming out for you soon, so stay tuned.
All right, thanks, guys, for checking us out.